Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the a presentation by the Executive Director of the IOOS Association, Josie Quintrell. Josie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Joe. I'm going to, oh, great. So Jen, you're driving. Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks all for inviting me to the GCOOS board meeting. It's always a treat to talk with you all, and I'm sorry we're not there in person. So next slide. As Joe said, I'm the executive director of the IOOS Association, and so we're the nonprofit organization that was formed, oh my, almost 20 years ago now by the 11 regional associations to kind of address their common issues, advocate for IOOS, the whole enterprise, the regional, the national, in terms of both advocating with a capital A on, with Congress and in the Hill, but also just being a champion for the work that's happening in the regions with our federal agencies and federal partners. So we work on common issues, we work on emerging issues and special projects. Each RA appoints 2 members to the association board, and the GCOOS board members are Barb and Joe, so thank you very much. And a big shout out to Barb, who's been on my executive committee for several years. She's my treasurer. She keeps an eagle eye on our expenses and just has been a real great advocate for a number of policy issues that we talk about at the national level. And Joe's been hit the ground running and has helped us over the last year on a number of issues as well. So next slide. So one of the key things we decided to do this year was, with the start of a new decade and with the RAs doing their 5-year proposals, we thought it'd be a good time for the association to do a strategic plan. Of course, we decided that in January, and then the pandemic hit. And we decided to continue with a virtual strategic planning process, and we had Jeremy Phillips help guide us through this. And there was a couple of things that kind of led into this. We had a Futures committee that had some of our founding directors on, and they were really encouraging us to embrace the original mission of IOOS, and that, I think, inspired us to be bold. I also want to say that we conducted a number of interviews with key people who have just key thought leaders, one of whom was Rick Spinrad, and that's turned out to be very fortuitous. As Carl's noted, Rick has been a longtime supporter of IOOS, and this summer he continued to voice that support. So I think his appointment as NOAA administrator will bode well for us in many ways. So a couple of things I want to point out with our strategic plan is the #1 goal is to increase funding for IOOS by 100%. And I want to emphasize that it's not just the funding, it's just that, as you know, in the Gulf, there are so many needs out there and we can't address them without resources. So the idea is to increase the funding for both the regional capacity and the national capacity by 100% over the 5 years. Another thing that was a high priority is increasing the visibility and reach of IOOS through communications, and then an emphasis on diversity and inclusion, which mirrors the emphasis that the administration has. So next slide. So we go back one. There you go. So FY22. So this is the one that's pending. We still don't know the president's budget, but it's a balancing act how we do these congressional requests. If we were to ask for the full amount that we need, we would not be taken seriously. So we kind of try and balance our ambition with what the members will see as a reasonable impact. And this year was our largest request ever, and this was a direct result of our strategic plan. So we were asking for $56 million for the regional line. That's up for $15 million. We're continuing our Fill the Gaps campaign, which actually started in the Gulf of Mexico with the radars back in FY17, and over the last 4 years has increased the regional line by about $8.5 million. And those are filling critical gaps in some of our national programs. So that's radars. Congress came back and said, we like the radars. We also like gliders. We said, fine, we actually do gliders too. And then a streamline for observations. So the president's budget is expected out in the end of May, so we're looking forward to that. I do know that the NOAA top line is up about 25%, and as the operational oceanography agency, it's going to be focusing on climate. And my sense is you can't do a lot of climate without good data. So I'm hoping there'll be a positive impact for IOOS. The other thing I wanted to point out is, Congress does the budget and sometimes Congress directs things, and harmful algal blooms have been trending in Congress, a lot of impacts, and so they actually put some money toward that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. And yes, earmarks are back. The association and all the directors have decided that we are better off advocating for a programmatic request, i.e. the 56 million, and are not going after these community projects for a couple of reasons. One, we're stronger together. We feel like building the network. But at the same time, if there are congressional indirects, we're hoping that it can fit into our overall program. So harmful algal blooms, there's been some exciting development on this, and in no part, and thanks to Barb, she's been a real leader on this with her work on HABs on the Florida shelf. So as I said, in FY20, Congress provided $1 million for a HAB observing network. And what this is really building off the research that NOAA has done. And they realized that a lot of the observations that are supporting the HAB forecast are being supported by research grants and therefore not sustainable. So they looked around, they saw IOOS with the regional systems. They know that HABs are regionally based, they differ region to region. And so they came up with a HAB observing framework and initiated these pilot projects in FY20, and the Gulf of Mexico was one of them. In FY21, there's actually 1 million directed to the Gulf for harmful algal blooms, mostly concerned around building a kind of a test center in Alabama. And we decided that pilot projects are great, and if we're not careful, they'll just benefit the individual regions, which is very important, but not really look at it from a national point of view. So we did a working group together that had people from ICOS, HAB scientists, RA directors, and then HAB nationally recognized scientists to sort of figure out what it would take to build a network. Barb was so important on that effort and really was just so helpful to kind of understand what the needs are and how to balance the fixation with huge, amazing automated systems with things like the HAB scope that's been so effective in the Gulf. So basically what that implementation plan kind of laid out was to kind of get a minimum but adequate system. It would probably take 30 million over the next 5 years to build out. And I just want to be clear, this isn't all the observations that go into forecasting, but really those observations that detect harmful species or their toxins. So this is the good news story. This is where IOOS has been around and has built the credibility that people are looking for ways to partner with us. Next slide. So I'm sure you've all heard a lot about infrastructure and the American Jobs Plan. So we are also think that IOOS is an important part of the infrastructure request. And so we've put together, riffing off of the administration's Build Back Better, Build Back Bluer initiative for 95 million for building the infrastructure. So this would be one-time appropriations. And we based this on, there's so many different observation platforms that IOOS uses, but there are a few that have national plans. So we based these on the ones that actually had national plans, and we were able to kind of say, here's the amount the plan was calling for, we are actually being funded at this level, so the gap between the two. So it mostly focuses on gliders, HFRs, moorings, and then the HAB network. And we're really calling IOOS the lighthouse of the 21st century. In other words, we're as important as highways and roads. We've been meeting with a number of different congressional members to highlight this. The House, it's very confusing at this point exactly when and what will happen. The House is likely to move first, but as with everything in Congress, it's very political. But we wanted to make sure we were part of the discussion. Next slide, please. So yes, we are very active on the Hill, and as Carl pointed out, I'm just so thrilled to say that we did get the ICOS Act reauthorized on New Year's Eve last year. It does mostly it just reauthorized the existing law, which is actually a very good framework. And so to answer the question, it is for another 5 years. It addressed a couple of kind of details, staggering the terms for the advisory committees. A couple of key things for the RAs. One is it actually has language that now has allowed federal representatives to serve on RA boards. Depending on your federal agency and their lawyer, you would get a different interpretation of whether that was allowed or not. And now with this law, that can actually happen. The other thing is we used to be called regional information coordinating entities in the law. We are now renamed regional coastal observing systems, so a little bit more in line with what we do. So that's it. We always monitor what's going on with other legislation so we can avoid duplication where possible, and we do a series of congressional briefings to kind of highlight how IOOS is making a difference on a variety of issues. Next slide. So 3 things that we're undertaking to kind of help promote IOOS. And one of the things, as Carl noted, climate is one of 4 priorities for the administration. And we looked around and realized that we've been out there collecting long-term data for between 10 to 20 years in the coastal zone. And so with that data, we're able to, get trends, identify events, but most importantly, how these trends and events are making impacts to people at their local and regional level. So this is everything from sea level rise to harmful algal blooms, ocean acidification, erosion, marine heat waves. So I know Carl and his staff have been frantic in responding to a lot of requests from the administration, and so we formed a small working group and are working on a short white paper that kind of talks about the IOOS current role and what we can do within this sort of coastal climate signal. We hope to do a series of technical webinars to educate ourselves. There's a lot of players in the coastal zone that are already collecting data and trying to understand how this all comes together and where the gaps are, and then do a community workshop and report to really highlight for the administration and others what IOOS can do in terms of understanding coastal climate change and how we can help people prepare and respond to it. Next slide. So communications was a huge priority coming out of the strategic plan. And I have to say that last fall, there was a National Academy Sustaining Observation Workshop that looked at everything from global down to the coastal. And one of their major recommendations is to improve communications too. So we are increasing our dues to the association so we can actually make a much better improvement in this. And we're working with the IOOS program office and going to be, we have a 5-month contract with ESP, which is Emily Petrolia's group. Barb knows her and Grant knows her because they've been helping us already. But anyways, they're a young firm out of Washington, D.C. who has a lot of experience with IOOS and the Hill. So they're going to be helping us develop a communication plan, some key messages, improve our outreach materials, work with the RAs on press events and op-eds and website upgrade, all around the guise of building awareness about IOOS and its importance, and hopefully that will translate into support. Next slide. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. Back in the fall, the association and the RA directors decided to augment and complement what all the regions are doing along this lines, and Carl has so willingly matched that. So we're going to be hiring, not sure yet, maybe a fellow or a staff person to really look at some of the opportunities to help implement this and some of the commonalities between the regions, and also some efforts that would enhance what we're all doing at the regional efforts. So things we're looking at is how we can improve our services to underserved communities, look at issues like environmental justice issues, outreach and education, and look toward possible implementations either through federal grants or through foundation support. So we're going to be moving forward with this in the next few months, and it's a joint project with all the RAs in the program office. And every time I've spoken to one of the administration leaders, it's one of their first questions is, how is and what can IOOS do to help address this issue? And I think this will be very helpful to move it forward in a meaningful way. Next slide. So just a couple of updates. So June 7th, we have our board call. We have 2 meetings in person, or we try to have 2 meetings in person a year, and then we have phone calls in between. And this one, after our board call, we'll be awarding the CARET Award. This is an award we established last year that sort of celebrates the kind of unique things it takes to make IOOS a success. And that's being collaborative, it's being a leader with vision, with courage. It was inspired by Rue Morrison, who was the executive director at GCOOS, who just exemplified those qualities to no end. And he was also, as some of you may know, a Scottish national. And so the CARET Award sort of honors both his collaborative nature and his love of the Scottish homeland. We are too thinking about whether to have our meeting in person in September, October timeframe, actually thinking we might be able to pull one off in the DC area, because then we don't have to worry about restrictions on federal travel. We're looking at Fill the Gaps. It's been a really successful program. We want to it's increased our funding, but it's also need to kind of figure out whether this gets morphed into a coastal climate signal or not. So that will be happening in the next couple of months, actually. And we're continuing to meet with NOAA leadership and others about IOOS and how we can help achieve some of the administration's priorities. And last slide. So if we were in person, I'm sure we would be celebrating Barb to no end. And I'm really sorry I can't be there, but I just want to do a huge shout out to Barb, who's just been a great friend and a colleague who allows me to say, Barb, you got to come to DC. We got to go meet with all those Gulf Coast members. And she does so willingly and has been so effective. And then what you all know is how great she is in working with people in the Gulf. And this just gives you a sliver of like the kind of work I require of my board members. So we are often coming together. And I just think the network has really been so strong, and partly because of Barb's leadership. And I think IOOS benefits from a really great, strong national network of the regional system. So Barb, Thank you. Thanks for all you've been, a good friend, a good advisor. I'm really glad you're not going too far and that I can still call on you for, what to do about those halves. But best of wishes.
Thank you, Josie.
So that's it, Joe. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Josie, thanks for the update. Appreciate it. Questions? The floor is open.
Joe, Bill Lynch, I have just a quick question for Josie. You mentioned the infrastructure, the 95.3 million. You had 4 categories there: the profile gliders, the surface currents, the HAB, and the mooring. I'm curious, Josie. When we talk infrastructure, and of course I'm kind of more glaring at the profile gliders component of this, but just in general, what within that 95.3 million, what did you sort of, define as infrastructure? Is it buying gliders in that case, buying more radars for surface currents? Is it people? Just if you have any type of knowledge that you could add to that.
Yeah, sure. So I looked for the gliders specifically. I looked at the glider plan and looked at how many glider lines and gliders were there. I did an analysis of a fairly high-level analysis of what was already in the water and made some estimates between that gap. So it is for acquisition of platforms. So it's for acquisition of the gliders, it's for the acquisition of the radars and of the moorings. And I based it off of those national plans.
Thank you.
So we couldn't use it for people. It's really for infrastructure.
It's for infrastructure. Yeah. Okay. And thank you very much, Josie.
Josie, you said that 95.3 million was a one-time opportunity. Is there any way to use any of that for the maintenance of things that might be added to the equipment inventory? Because that's always the problem. We buy more gliders, we buy more moorings, but there's no additional funding at all, or minimally anyway, to maintain this stuff.
Right, and that is exactly true, Joe. And I will say that the 93 million is very aspirational. And we'll be lucky if we see any of it. And I think it's all being written, what it can be used for and what it can't be used for. But I think we have identified that we have these gaps, and if we are able to get that infrastructure request, I think in the next year we are going to do a big push to talk about the importance of keeping them operating and maintaining them. And that is always a struggle with observations, sustaining observations. And it's not a problem unique to IOOS, the stuff. So.
Josie, also with the new administration settling in now, has there been an emergence of any new congressional members that are that haven't been haven't been that influential within the environmental community in the past?
Well, Senator Wicker remains a big advocate for ocean, for the Gulf, and for observations and data. And he's the ranking member on the CJS committee. And so that's wonderful. Senator Shelby is also very supportive of the work that GCOOS does and the importance of environmental data. So in terms of new members, yes, there's always new members, but it always takes a little bit of time to, nurture them and become aware. But I think one of the things that IOOS has always we've been able to take advantage of is our bipartisan support. People really appreciate that we do good science, good data. We're policy neutral. We're not advocating for different policies. We're just, here's the information, here's how the Gulf is changing, and here's what we can do about it. And I think that's been one of the strengths of the program.
Okay, I've got a question here from Jorge Brenner. He says, thank you for the presentations. This is a question for Carl and or Josie. On the new ecological forecasting priority of IOOS, what would be an example of a great project or the role of GCOOS in developing the strategy?
Well, we could just ask Barb that, Carl. So
Yeah, but I'm going to say something about HABs, hypoxia, all those H's that we have in the Gulf of Mexico.
So, and I would agree with that, Barb. I mean, I think one of the things we're looking at, and Carl can jump in here as well, is that we're trying to look at the suite of ecological impacts. So harmful algal blooms is critical, hypoxia, ocean acidification, nutrients, and we don't, right now they're kind of segregated, and partly because, congressional interest is that way. But the tools we're pushing in this HAB observing network, they're great for the harmful species, but they have broader applications as well. And that's one reason why we're so passionate about it, is that it can be used for multiple different impacts. And Carl, NOAA had an ecological forecasting effort a couple of years ago, and I don't know if that's regaining traction now or.
Yeah, so there's still a team within NOAA that we're working on the ecological forecasting roadmap implementation. There were several years of the folks leading that. Their budgets were zeroed out in the president's budget, so it's been a tough row to hoe in terms of planning for getting things done when you're supposed to have $0 each year and then Congress puts the money back in. So that's been a tough challenge, but we've been having talks about reviving some of those activities. And then Barb's answer was right. I mean, I was going to say AbScope is a great example, and a recipe for projects that fit into that category from my perspective is having an end user sort of decision point that's understood, and then building the OBS, the predictions, and the information services that to support those decisions. And when it's a case of human health or safety at risk, that makes it more compelling. And so the West Coast harmful algal bloom forecasts can be toxic for humans, and so that's an example there. It's relevant for the clam fishery in the Northwest in Oregon and Washington, but it's also relevant for domoic acid and other species in Southern California. So lots of different aspects there, and we're being brought into a climate and fisheries initiative where the longer range fisheries management decisions would be informed by better integrated data, information, products, and services for their long-range fisheries management decisions. And so vulnerability assessments of different species with different impacts related to the conditions in the water, lots of different capabilities there that you might integrate for those longer time scales for a fisheries management application decision point, for instance.
So you mentioned in your briefing that earmarks are back. It's got to make life difficult for you and for Carl when you have an earmark for a state, yet you're trying to spread the wealth, if you will, across 11 RAs, and in the meantime, not annoy, the representative that's sponsoring the earmark. Delicate balance, to say the least.
Yeah, and I'm just really pleased that the directors kind of see the value of going high. I think we will benefit more from our programmatic increase instead of just little bits, kind of sprinkled here and there. And I think the challenge will be, and I have talked to appropriations staff about this, is, I think they're concerned too that whatever investments might come that way, that they're not one-offs, that they become part of a sustained program. And that's where, linking with IOOS could be really valuable. The one thing that concerns me is we're just vulnerable because we have ways to get money out to the communities. We saw this with Sea Grant a few years ago. Some member wanted to do a aquaculture thing, and they'd like, oh, we did it to Sea Grant. Sea Grant goes, oh, So it's just, there's things we control, things we can't. And I think, we've been really clear. It's the programmatic request that is most important, but we will work to make these programs work however we can. The one thing that's interesting is because it's very transparent, you know exactly where it's coming from and who's doing it, so we can, work with them.
Yeah. Other questions for Josie?
I just want to shout out. Great. I just want to do a quick shout out to Grant, who. So one of the things we do to get these requests through is we have to do a number of meetings and do these really detailed appropriation requests for all the House members. And it's not like a college applications where it's the unified application. They're each different, and Grant really did yeoman's work, because the Gulf, you have a lot of members of Congress, and I'm just really grateful, and you guys all owe a big debt to Grant. It's not easy work, and so thank you.
I'll second that one, Josie. Grant, I'll ask you this question. How many different interactions did you have this spring with congressional staffers?
I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 24. Not all of them were, some email, some over the phone, some more direct than others, but yeah, in the neighborhood of a couple dozen. And yeah, it's amazing how much variability is in the operations of each of those different offices.
So for those of you who aren't real familiar with the process with these appropriation forms, Josie works with all of us. When I say us, for GCOOS, it's primarily Grant and I for major talking points. But the mess is that everybody's appropriation forms are different. They come out at a different time. They have different deadlines. And thankfully, Grant keeps up with all of that for us, so that it's like a constant jigsaw puzzle or something of who's got something needed this week versus next week. And I'm really thankful he stays on top of it for us.
And just so everybody knows, the Senate is still pending. They just set their deadline in June. So the Senate's a little easier than the House, but we'll do that.
Heck, we only have 10 of those.
Right. And what's complicated is it's going to come out with the president's budget, and then we're going to have to adjust. And so we're not done yet, Grant. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Look at it as job security, right?
There you go.
And any of you who are good, it really also makes a difference to hear from constituents. So all of you board members who are in your area, it really is good to have you guys reach out as well. So
yeah,
I'm happy to provide any contact information for anybody. If you ever need it, just reach out to me and I can get you any contact in any of those offices.
Thanks, Grant. I had a really nice conversation with a new Congressman, Byron Donalds, not that long ago, and basically his response from me, or his response to me telling him about ocean observations were, we need the data. So this is a very conservative new representative, so I was glad to hear that.
thank you. That's great. That's good to know.
Josie, if that's Senator Wicker trying to call you, you can answer it.
Or Shelby. Or Shelby.
Or Shelby.
Anybody from the Gulf, I'm going to answer it.
He doesn't say that to the other 10 RAs, I'm sure.
Believe me, if it's a 202 area code, it gets answered.
Okay, any other questions, comments for Josie?
Well, thank you all, and just it's exciting to see the great work that's happening in the Gulf, and I look forward to seeing you in person sometime.
Well, thank you, Josie, and thanks for all your support at those levels. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Josie.
Okay, gang. The next thing we have on our agenda is a 15-minute break. I'm feeling generous, so how about if we give it 17 minutes and we can reconvene at 2:45 Eastern time. That's about 17 minutes from now, and we'll begin the second half of the presentations today, and that'll be Barb's Executive Director's report. Okay? Sound like a plan? All right, if so, we'll be back in 17 minutes.